Everyone has a bright light inside of them that deserves to be seen by the world. That's why it's time to shine the light on the extraordinary who are accomplishing phenomenal things. This is the Shine Out Loud Show with Lillian Ogbogo.
Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever in the world you are, and welcome to another episode of the Shine Out Loud Show. Now, tonight we are talking about corporate biases, inclusion, diversity. We are talking about ending the idea of being a first and only in your field for any normal achievement. And I have the distinctive pleasure of speaking with a man who has said enough is enough. This needs to change. I'm talking about MAYOKUN Mac Alonge, the CEO and founder of the Equal Group. So, Mac, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You are welcome. You're welcome. So, we're talking disrupting biases. We're talking about ending this idea that diversity and inclusion is a conversation that is just a fad. So here's my question. Why in 2019 are we still holding on to, still having this discussion about diversity, inclusion, and corporate bias?
It's a good question. And it's one that I often ask myself because we should be so far beyond this. But in terms of the why, it's because we've got so much work to do. And I think a lot of people have traditionally misunderstood the term and kind of used it as a tokenary or arbitrary gesture to say, okay, let's have one woman or one black or ethnic minority person on the board, and then all of a sudden we're diverse. And that's not it. It's about getting to grips with things. It's about actually digging deep into the why. So why do you have an all-male board that is full of white middle-aged men?
Yes.
Is that a reflection of fact? Are you saying that, it's a fact that only white middle-aged men can run a company? Because I can show you a lot of black women, I can show you a lot of Asian women and Asian men and black men that are equally as capable, if not more so.
And so we're on this road and we're looking at how has the lack of diversity actually hurt our economy in the UK, hurt the corporate world?
That's also a good question. And I think looking at things globally probably adds a little bit more significance to that question. So I always think about the 2008 financial crisis. So that financial crisis was kicked off by companies, by banks primarily, selling subprime mortgages to people that they knew couldn't afford it. Yeah. And it's this whole concept that people were willing to do things that were quite frankly inhumane for the sake of getting a bigger bonus or getting a promotion or whatever their capitalist drivers were. But when you look at kind of the composition of these companies, they were largely white middle-aged men. So within that conversation, looking at the personal, the tangible impacts of, what does it mean to sell a subprime mortgage to an individual, knowing that that person has a family, knowing that that person will be homeless in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years time, whatever the time scale, that person will be homeless. And you look around the table and it's like, actually, these people are pretty well off. They've never been homeless, so they don't know the human consequences of being homeless. They don't know the human consequences of being bankrupt. They don't know the human consequences of not being able to get a job or not being able to provide for your family. And that's when you kind of look around the table and you say, actually, if everybody has had the same experience, who is there to arbitrate what people are doing? If everybody's got the same viewpoint on life in terms of what specific lives are valuable, what specific lives are worthless,
right?
Then how do you challenge actions? How do you see what is good, both in terms of corporate responsibility as well as the sociological and political impacts of decisions.
Okay, so you've actually made
And
a
I think,
Go ahead, sorry.
so I was just gonna take that a bit further and bring that to kind of modern day impacts and dialogues, if you like. And thinking about Brexit, David Cameron opened up the Brexit debate and quit his job, and he's not going to feel the impacts of Brexit. Whether we exit or we remain, David Cameron's going to be pretty well off.
Of course,
Tony Blair has shown what ex-prime ministers can go on to do. He earns millions of pounds as a speaker, as ironically a peace ambassador. So he's, it's this kind of silver spoon concept. So you don't actually feel the impacts or implications of the policies that you're proposing, the policies that you're arguing for or against.
And this is actually quite important. And I still have this image of David Cameron literally going, "Ooh, Brexit, didn't plan for this to go this way," and whistling as he left the podium, going, "Not my problem."
Yep.
But you kind of bring up to light this idea of the old boys club, and that a lot of these boards are primarily the old boys club at play. Will that go on successfully forever, or is there a way to actually break it up and create a different sort of network that can actually be more diverse and more inclusive?
So will it go on forever? I sure as hell hope not, and that's kind of the driver for my company, the Equal Group. That's what we aim to dismantle, the concept that only people that have been to Oxford or Cambridge are of use in society, or only people that have been to Oxford and Cambridge can add value to conversations. It's total nonsense. I over my years I used to work for a Big Four consulting firm, and a lot of that was made up of old boys, Cambridge graduates, Oxford graduates. And I used to sit in meetings with them on a regular basis, and at no point did I think these people are miles better than me, or they're in any way superior to me in terms of the knowledge that they brought to a conversation, or their clarity of thought, or their level of articulation. For the most part, the thing that stuck out is the level of privilege and entitlement with which they operate. And that is kind of a common theme that runs through it. If you've been told all your life that you're going to be a leader, or you've been told that you're being prepared for leadership or management or whatever that looks like, then you will tend to operate with a level of privilege and a level of entitlement. So when you walk into a room, you will carry with you that pretense, or that presupposition that you are in a room to lead that conversation, you're in a room to drive that conversation. And I guess in terms of how that's dismantled, it's by people questioning things, about by people providing robust challenge. So if you're in a room and everybody is from Oxford and Cambridge, ask yourself why. Is that room full of Oxford and Cambridge graduates because they're the best, or is it some leftover ideology that this is the elite and the creme de la creme?
I mean, if we are talking about Oxford, Cambridge, Eton and all those schools, we need to really then question what happened to Boris Johnson. Clearly, that's a mistake there. Somebody needs to get their money back, but we won't go.
You know what? It's funny because Boris is, I believe, is actually quite clever. But
you have to be that clever to act that dumb. But
precisely. And I think even that is funny because somebody that presented themselves as Boris Johnson does, if they didn't have the Eton, Oxford, Cambridge prestige behind them, what would they end up as? And for the most part, they would be working in a pub or sweeping a street somewhere. which shows you the power that, some of these institutions have.
Mm-hmm. So, and we're talking about inclusion. We're and it beggars belief, because you now have forward-thinking companies like Fenty having shown that there is financial gain in diversifying one's product, and yet we still have companies who fail to see that there is a benefit for them to diversify. So what is it that Fenty knows that they don't?
I don't think it's necessarily about knowledge, and I guess it might come across as a bit of a harsh conclusion to say that the knowledge isn't the barrier, because there's been studies and research done for years and years and years now that demonstrates that companies that are more diverse and more inclusive tend to be more profitable, tend to be more innovative, tend to be more productive. So it's not the research that's lacking, it's people getting out of their own way. And for the most part, you look at things like nepotism, you look at things like the old boys club, the old boys network, as you suggested, and they're not taking these kind of actions because they believe that actually there's more value in hiring my mate than there is hiring the best candidate.
Yeah.
It's more just reinforcing this whole you scratch my back, I scratch your back mentality, which is what we see in Parliament day in, day out.
I mean, and that's and this is a problem, because like you've actually said, it's impacting the corporate world not to be diversified. It's impacting, and not just in the UK, globally. And we've even pointed out prior to the show starting, we had a quick conversation how even in Africa, if we go back to the continent, even looking at Nigeria, how they will clamor to hire the least qualified foreign person over a qualified indigent. So it's not just in the UK or the US that we're having that conversation about our diversity, because we've seen that happen in companies across Africa.
Yeah, and I think there's some level of miseducation that has gone on. So, when you get into these spaces, when you get into high-level consulting firms and parliamentary corridors and positions of power, it kind of reinforces everything that you've been told. And we could probably go off on a tangent and talk about white supremacy and that kind of concept, but a lot of it is steeped in this capitalist ideology that you have the elite, and in order to progress in life you have to become part of the elite,
right?
Which is an interesting concept, because you look at kind of people that haven't been born into that, and they strive to everybody strives to better themselves. It's natural. You strive for better than what you were given.
Yes.
But to some extent, if you buy into that myth that having lots of money makes you a better person, and means that your value in life is that much more than a person that is poor, you have to kind of pick that apart from a humanitarian point of view to say, actually, is this the right thing that we want to be teaching our kids? Is this the right concept that we want to leave to the next generation, to say, if you have a lot of money, you can treat anybody like crap, quite frankly, and it doesn't matter because you have a lot of money.
And I think that in itself is a question and a show unto itself, because we can sit here and debate it, and we can even talk about, where do we draw the line? Who do we hold responsible? We can talk about the music industry, how now rap and the hip hop industry seem to be pushing that idea when that was not the mission of music. But, so we can digress quite extensively. Now, we're going to come back to the equal group, because I want to find out what inspired you, what was the pivotal moment that inspired you to start it. But before we do, I noticed that you were very passionate about the 56 Men project that's out. What are the 56 Men?
Yeah, so the campaign is 56 Black Men, and it's about addressing the negative portrayal of Black people within the media. Not just the negative portrayal, but the absence of a positive portrayal. So, Sifas Williams, the mastermind behind it, kind of came up with this concept of picturing or creating striking images of men in their hoodies, but not in the way that the media portrays it. So when there's something negative happened, if somebody's been killed or somebody stabbed somebody or shot somebody or anything like that, the picture, the media will kind of go after this thuggish picture of a Black man to say, this is either the victim or the perpetrator of the crime. And there's never any kind of balance to that. There's no counterbalance. So for every white rapist or white murderer or white terrorist to some extent that you see in the media, you see hundreds of CEOs, you see hundreds of bank managers, you see hundreds of financial advisors, politicians, doctors, lawyers, you name it. You see the positive counterbalance to that. Whereas with Black people, you don't. It's either a killer, a drug dealer, a rapper,
or a victim.
None of those are mutually exclusive, by the way.
Yeah.
Or potentially a sportsman. So it feeds into this narrative that, as Black people, we can only find a space in certain areas if we are killing people, shooting people, or rapping or dancing or
dunking a football or something.
Fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So the campaign is really about addressing that narrative and saying, enough's enough. We need the media. We need to start holding the media to account when it comes to the images that they portray of our people, because it has a lasting consequence. So for me growing up as a young man, who do I look to be my role model?
Right.
If I'm in a position now to have a child, who do they look up to as their role model? The power of media is enormous. So if media is being used to say that, white people can be CEOs and doctors and their options are unlimited, but for Black people, you can only be one of 4 things, that's damaging.
It's actually beyond damaging, because the way they report now, and I'm actually hesitant to phrase this way. So this last weekend or weekend before, the young girl that was stabbed, Jody, that was stabbed, and it was all over the news, and there were a lot of press conferences, there was a lot of talk, there was parliamentary time, and the same day there was another young man who was stabbed in Birmingham. And yet the coverage was not equal. So it took 2 days for me to actually hear the name of the young man that was stabbed. But I knew the name of this young girl that was stabbed. Now, that being said, no loss of life. We're not, saying, any loss of life of a young person is wrong. But the media has a responsibility, because, like you said, they show this young girl, she is the victim, but there's almost a tinge of, well, the young man may have been, or it could be a case of, it's never this person is a victim straight out. It's, yeah,
100%. And even in looking at the narrative around terrorism and that kind of conversation, you see the media portrays things very differently. So when a white man or Caucasian man kills en masse, which they've been proven to do time and time again, it's a mental health issue, or he had some kind of emotional breakdown.
He was depressed, and
exactly.
So
When somebody of color does it, it's a terrorist attack, and they're linked to ISIS, and their cousin's second, fourth auntie had a Googled terrorism one time, and therefore they're linked to Syrian terrorist cells, and like, it's absolutely ridiculous the lengths that they'll go to portray people of color in a negative light, and specifically black people.
And now, and that point is, because they've created this monster of the black man in a hood, black boys in a hood. What is the core fear of the black men in hoods?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think for me personally, it's kind of demonizing something that is part of our everyday attire, and I guess this conversation I had with Sifas, the founder of 56 Black Men, a while back, in terms of when you look at young black men, what do they wear? What do teenagers wear that are black? Not even just black, because white kids wear them too. But we wear tracksuits, we wear hoodies, we wear jackets with hoods, because it's practical. Sometimes we're out, sometimes it's cold, we put up our hood to protect us. It's actually a very multifunctional piece of clothing. It's really quite good. Sports people wear them as well. So, that's what we kind of gravitate towards as an item of clothing. And the demonization of it isn't because there's anything significantly wrong with the clothing. It's more to do with who's wearing it. So I said this on the BBC a couple of weeks back. When Mark Zuckerberg wears a hoodie, there's nothing threatening about it. When a white middle-aged, middle-class white person wears a hoodie, it's not demonized at all. And women aren't clutching their purses, and there's no fear that is connected with that. But the moment a black person puts on the same garment, it's automatically something to be afraid of, and it's automatically a problem. So then you have to think about, okay, is it the clothing that's the issue, or is it the person wearing it?
Oh, that must have been an interesting interview on the BBC. If you put it that way.
It was really good. It was really good.
And I can't answer that because I find myself listening to you, and I know that there have been times at night I'm walking, or and I see young black boys with the hoods up. I'm actually looking at them and going, okay. And you find that you are, even as a black woman, you're almost socialized into going, I have to be wary. And then unless you catch yourself, it's easy to do.
100%. And I'd be a hypocrite if I said that I hadn't walked through groups of black men and thought, I better watch myself. But again, this shows you the power of the media, and similar things happen in different contexts as well. So around the time of 7/7, I remember vividly being on the bus, and an Asian guy in a long Islamic dress came on, and he had a backpack, and I had a double take, and I was like, oh my God, is this my last day? And a lot of that is to do with what the media were portraying, any other day. And obviously it's unfortunate the events that happened around that time, but it shows you how the media can play into what you choose to be afraid of.
Yeah, and it's very strange, and I think you made that point about holding the media accountable and responsible, but I also think the onus is on us as well to actually say we will not accept these stereotypes any longer.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot has to be done in terms of how and when we speak out, because I feel like for a long time we've been passive, and for a long time we've not spoken out. For a long time we've just accepted these narratives as part of everyday life, and we haven't questioned things like, why aren't we seeing positive portrayals of ourselves? And I think to some extent, because we've been so used to being excluded from certain spaces, the moment we get one kind of, so taking the film industry as an example, we've been excluded from that for a large period of time. So the moment we get a role within a movie, we're celebrating it without actually thinking deeper. Okay, is this the kind of role that we want to be portraying? Yeah. And that's why they've been able to cast us as robbers and killers and
bangers and
all of this kind of stuff, because we've been so starved. There's black people out there that want to be actors, and they've been starved of work because we don't have the facilities to tell our own stories. We don't have the infrastructure to sufficiently tell our own stories. Therefore, whenever we're given access to these areas, we kind of just jump on it, because the alternative is to not get to share your craft with the world, to not get that visibility that you crave. As I said, everybody is in the habit of trying to better themselves. Everybody is in this so-called rat race.
Yeah. We are going to end up delving so far onto some other topics that we're
I'm up for it.
Because I think that there needs to be a conscious calling of, we cannot do those roles anymore. We cannot have the constant portrayal of the single mother, uneducated single mother, the feisty black friend, the thug guy, and then if the guy is educated, then he's classed as a wimp. We can't have those stereotypes anymore.
I agree completely. But it's easy to say if you're not in a position to provide an alternative. So I guess for me, it's always that thing of, okay, what's the credible alternative? Because if we're saying that we're just going to boycott it outright, cool, but the implications of that are that all of the young actors and young actresses that have spent the last 5-10 years of their life dedicating their time to learning this craft don't then have roles. So we need to create credible alternatives to say, okay, don't be a pimp, don't be a prostitute, don't be a sassy black friend. Come and be an educated professor or a graduate or a lawyer or a technologist or scientist, whatever it is.
Or action hero. We'll take action hero
or an action hero. Yeah, definitely. We'll do that. But again, I guess that kind of leads us nicely onto this whole Wakanda Black Panther kind of dialogue. And I'm probably one of the few critics of that whole thing also, because it was great that we got to see black superheroes and we got to take over the screen for a day, a month, or whatever it was, 2 months. But for me, there were still elements of white saviourness in the film. There were still elements of I guess I have to look at the infrastructure of movies as well to say, okay, who's benefiting? So Black Panther being a blockbuster, who really benefited financially?
Right. Okay. So I see where you're going with that. And now the same way you said, if we say that we should boycott them, there has to be an alternative, because Black Panther wouldn't have been made. So the question is, what's the alternative there? But before you answer that question, I've had a question coming for you. And the question is, how has social media changed this climate of purely showing Anglo-only stories? Or is that more of a vacuum?
Social media is a tricky one. So I am not like a great fan of social media. I use it because I have to. If it were left to me, I wouldn't have any social media accounts. I don't really post too much, but it is good, and it does give people a platform, and it does allow people to, reach a wide audience, and people go viral nowadays, and it spreads the message a lot quicker than waiting for traditional mediums to pick it up. So even using the 56 Black Men campaign as an example, that went viral via social media, and off the back of that, Sky News picked it up, BBC picked it up, ITV, I think Channel 5 picked it up. All of these other outlets picked it up as a credible story to run with because of what it did on social media. So, I can't take anything away from social media. But at the same time, I'm going to sound like a bit of a broken record here, but it comes down to the financials. Is it possible to really make a good living off social media? So if we're talking about alternatives, is social media a credible alternative for having a blockbuster film such as Black Panther? I would argue it isn't, because of all of the merchandising that go. The movie industry is absolutely massive in terms of the financial implications of having a blockbuster in a way that social media can't compare at the moment.
I see your point now, but at the same time, I wanted to say I have a love, sometimes we're not friends, relationship with social media, but at the same time, we can actually say that there is some good to come, because this morning I watched a clip, a fan fiction clip of somebody has reimagined the Fresh Prince story and created this clip to show what it could look like. There's no budget, it's fan fiction, and all black cast again, and and I'm saying Will Smith needs to see this, because they've given it an edge. They've done the Riverdale thing, given it an edge, so it's not a comedy as it was. They've updated it, and it looked amazing. That's on social media right now.
That's dope. I'll have to check it out. And that, I hope that becomes something. I really do, because as a people, we're very creative. There's a million and one ideas out there, and for me, it's just a shame that we don't, as a community, have that infrastructure to put behind people to say, okay, I've seen this really good thing on social media, I'm gonna put 5 million into it, 10 million into it, whatever it is, and actually make it a network show, or make it a feature-length film, or whatever it is. We don't necessarily have that capital or the infrastructure yet to do those kind of things.
But I think it's work in progress. Everything has to start somewhere.
Yeah.
So as much as I'm loving this, because we could digress and keep going, and then we'll touch on Idris Elba as James Bond, which I say no.
Yeah, let's go. Let's talk about it. You say no. Why?
I say no. I say no because I think that's shenanigans. Because when we're saying, oh, let's make Idris Elba James Bond, we know the character that Ian Fleming wrote about. He gave a description, gave a type, and all of that. It's to me saying, let's make Idris James Bond is mischief making and a poison chalice. One, Idris is too good of an actor to drink that poison chalice. He doesn't need those problems. Two, it's a secondhand role. Seriously, it's a secondhand role. And three, we will lose our minds if somebody woke up tomorrow and made Shaft Bradley Cooper. We, as a community, would lose our minds.
Yeah. Okay, I can see where you're coming from.
So my thing is,
see that.
Don't give Idris James Bond. Write a role for a spy who happens to be black, who is great at his job, leaps off buildings, and just so happens, hey, they cast Idris Elba for it. Not some second-hand tired role. I mean, I'm a Bond fan.
I agree with that. And I will take it one step further, though, to say, let the writer be a black man, because we need to tell our own stories. We need to have access to the same level of infrastructure that James Bond has. So, and I think I'm a big film fan. One of the things that frustrates me is when you see really good black films and they'll be in the cinema for 2 days and then they're gone. And then there's a really average Caucasian film, and that will have like a 4-month run.
It runs to somebody's children become old.
Now, Exactly. I could probably find a cinema now and go and see Aquaman. And I quite enjoyed Aquaman, but it wasn't that great that it deserved 4 months.
I mean, even
So that's
Jason
when we need to
Momoa
start
said
looking
it was bad.
Precisely. But that's when we need to start looking at the infrastructure behind this to say, okay, what is the strategy? What is the process, the thought process that goes into these things? Because obviously the longer that you get at the cinema,
The more.
you can take at box office.
And in saying
Therefore,
that,
by minimizing the black films and the amount of screen time that they have, you're essentially reinforcing that concept that black films can't be as commercially viable. Well, obviously they can't, because you're not giving them the same opportunity. You're not giving them the same chance. Give me a black film and then give that a 4-month run and see if it takes the same at a box office as Aquaman did or any of these other distinctly average films.
and but at the same time saying that, there's something about, again, our self-responsibility in taking. There is the Marlon Palmer, I believe that's his right last name. Marlon Palmer in the UK, he runs a black film club, and almost like he does cinema showings. And this man has made it his mission to make sure black films get seen in the UK, especially in London. And he's been doing that for many, many years. And I think there needs to be more of that. And again, with the power of social media, you have more people who are putting those things together, putting, film nights out. And I remember there were people when Black Panther came out that they hired places with their own cinema screens and ran the movie and had people go see the movie. So there is... it's not where we want it to be, but there's a it's starting.
Yeah. And, I applaud people like, is it Marlon Palmer?
Yes.
Because things like this are needed. And we as a community need to get behind that as much as we get behind things like the Black Panther, because, this has more of a lasting impact on our community per se.
So, let's go back to the equal group. What was it about? What was it that made you step out from the energy sector and create the equal group?
So I guess the first thing was that I opened my eyes. I've always been fairly ambitious. I've always kind of aspired to be in senior management, aspired to be in leadership, and I looked up within the industry and I couldn't see myself. I couldn't even see close to myself,
right?
If that makes sense. And that lack of representation really started to impact me. It didn't impact me at first because I was young and ambitious. When you're young, you have that go-to attitude, and you'll be the one that breaks down all of these years of discrimination and prejudice that have gone before you.
Yes.
But the more I kind of persevered within the industry, the more I became disillusioned, because I was extremely educated, very experienced, had a breadth of knowledge across all of the sectors that I had worked in. Yet I was working for people who didn't have the similar level of credentials. And, stepping back from that situation, you start to ask yourself questions like, how is this person above me? How did they get into leadership? What was their route? And I saw that within those questions, the answers came in the form of nepotism, and they came in the form of all of these other things. So while I was working for a Big Four consultancy, I've always kind of looked to get mentorship from people that had gone before me. So I spoke to one guy who was fairly senior within the organization, and we're talking about promotion. I think I'd been promised promotion for quite a while. And it just wasn't coming. It was being talked about, and I had to kind of step back to say, okay, how long will I allow this person to talk to me about promotion without it actually materializing? So I spoke to him about it, and he was saying, don't just basically don't put all your eggs in that one basket. Look around. But a lot of what he was saying was do all of the other stuff, so the extracurricular, like the networking and schmoozing and going out for drinks and all of this. And while I was at the company, I was working, I would say 15, 16-hour days, and I didn't have time to network. I didn't have time to go to drinks because I was just working so hard. So there's the old adage that you have to work twice as hard to get half as much, and I just thought that it's unsustainable. And then it was kind of a case of, okay, why can't me just being really good at my job be enough? Because people are progressing. People that aren't good at their jobs are progressing on the power of their ability to go out for drinks and laugh at rubbish jokes and all of these other things that don't make you good at your job. So they're entitled to promotion and I'm not. That seems like a broken system to me. That seems like a legacy that we should not pass on to the next generation. So taking a step back from that, it's a case of, okay, if this is the status quo, what do we need to build in order to make this stuff stop? Because it's unsustainable. We can't keep having things like the financial crisis and having things like the Me Too scandal and having things like footballers running up and down the pitch and banana skins being thrown at them and racist chants being chanted at them. It's unsustainable. It's not, we're not animals. We're all human beings, so we should be treated as such. So that's kind of where the background came for my thoughts around the equal group. And I guess just to give you an insight into what the equal group's purpose is, we're aiming to take diversity and inclusion seriously to a certain extent and give companies the tools that they need to actually make their organizations more inclusive and more diverse and more equal. At the end of the day, it's about being true meritocracies. So can you, hand on heart, say that when you're recruiting for a position, you hired the best person? Of course you can't. Can you say that at this moment in time, can you say that there was no bias within your decision making when you recruited, when you promoted, when you gave a pay rise, or even when you issued a disciplinary? Of course you can't. We all, as individuals, hold biases. Some of it is shaped by our personal experiences. Some of it is shaped by the media. Some of it is shaped by a lack of exposure to an underrepresented group. So we don't necessarily know what to think about the person. We don't necessarily know how to take certain nuances. So essentially we're in the process of creating platforms that allow companies to remove that element of bias from their decision making. So data, hard cold data, there can be no bias around it.
Okay. But the data is being used by somebody. So doesn't that still put a bias slant on the data?
100%, but that's where monitoring comes into it. So, for example, if you have an interview process whereby two different interviewers are interviewing the same candidates and one person just so happens to have a bias against women, for example, that will show up in the facts and figures because the interview process isn't just a one-stage interview. Right. It's done over a series of rounds. So the platform that we've developed.
We seem to have lost Mac for a second. Bear with us. Okay, Mac.
Oh, hello?
There you are.
Sorry. Yep. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Sorry about that. So the platform that we developed is EDI Hire, which aims to make the application process more of an aptitude-based process. So giving let's say, for example, you wanted to hire a developer. So a Java developer, you'd give them tests on how good their Java development skills are.
Right.
So that would be round one in the application process. You'd then go on to a telephone interview, perhaps, then go on to a face-to-face interview, perhaps. All the while you're collecting data points, you're collecting aptitudes, you're collecting a sense of what that candidate is like. So if somebody has performed really well in the aptitude test, really well in the phone interview test, and not so well in the face-to-face interview, and then somebody from a different demographic has kind of done the same but performed better in the face-to-face interview, over time that will tell. Over time you'll be able to bring up trends that could indicate that somebody may have a need for further training in terms of not holding certain biases against different demographics.
Okay.
But again, it's about that evidence base to say on what basis are you hiring, because at the moment it's all very arbitrary, and that's why you can do things like reinforce the old boys club, and you can engage in nepotism.
Okay. And I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about how this works, and looking at the platform that you're building. And you talk about recruitment or recruiters being that first step to actually abolish biases. When you still have people, I give you a classic example. Had a recruiter call me the other day, and they mispronounced my surname the first time. I pronounced it again. They mispronounced it the second time. I clarified again, and then you could almost hear them audibly sigh, and then mispronounced it for the third time and go on to tell me about the role. And I'm like, yeah, no, there's no conversation to be had here.
I think I get that a lot. And for me, the whole recruitment model needs to change because it's fundamentally broken. So one of the things that we're working on long term is more of a kind of a blockchain based initiative whereby you carry your credentials with you. So if a specific industry can agree on a methodology with which to assess people, a methodology within which to do performance management, do appraisals, do pay reviews, etc., over time it makes it easier to compare and contrast. So when you move between two companies within the same industry,
right,
it makes it easier for you to take your track record with you.
Okay.
Therefore, over time, there's no need for you to necessarily engage in this whole recruitment consultant. And, I've got a big thing against things like LinkedIn and CVs, because a CV is not necessarily an indicator of who's the better candidate. A CV is an indicator of how good you are at writing a CV, which for the most part has nothing to do with the job that you're applying for, unless you're applying for a CV writer role.
And we do know people lie on their CV.
Everybody lies on their CV, and that's what makes it even more ridiculous. I've read people's LinkedIn profiles that I used to work with, and just thought, you're chatting rubbish. You didn't used to do this. You've never done this. But it sounds good, so recruitment agents will call you. And this whole keyword mentality that's out there at the moment. If you use enough buzzwords in your profile, somebody's gonna find you for something. And this is kind of fundamentally at odds with what the purpose of job roles are, what the purpose of careers are. I think we've moved so far away from people actually enjoying the work that they do, actually feeling a sense of purpose in their day-to-day lives, because everybody's trying to keep up appearances, and everybody's trying to live this kind of this social media life, if you like. that people don't necessarily find fulfillment in their roles. And I saw it a lot within the corporate world, that people grew attached to the company that they worked for, not because they liked what they were doing or not because they loved their industry, but because they could see people's eyes light up when they would tell them what they did or who they worked for.
Yeah.
And that isn't fulfillment. That's not success. But what we want to do at the group is flip the dynamic on its head to say, okay, if you're good at your job, how do you progress within an industry? So taking down the glass ceilings, taking down the barriers, taking down all of these things that stop people progressing, i.e. nepotism, i.e. biases and prejudices within the workplace. It fundamentally comes down to there is a good fit between a company and a candidate. It's about the science to find that. Right. And we live in a world where business models have been flipped on their heads. So the way that we order taxis has changed fundamentally. The way that we order food has changed fundamentally. The way that we do our weekly shopping has changed fundamentally. Yet the way that we recruit people hasn't changed in thousands of years. And that for me is the reason why, as a society, we're so, for lack of a better word, screwed.
So, okay, we're talking about this. We're talking about diversity, inclusion. We're talking about, trying to end bias in a corporate workplace. So how do we talk about race in a meaningful way in the corporate world without it?
Good question. This is a funny one because, I think I was talking to someone about this the other day, and with gender is so much more easier to talk about for people, because even if you've got an all-white, middle-aged, middle-class board, chances are, for the most part, even if it's just their mother, they've had a conversation with somebody of the opposite sex. They know somebody of the opposite sex that is intelligent. They know somebody of the opposite sex that has progressed and excelled within their workplace, within academia, within whatever industry they operate within. So it's an easier sell to say to an all-white middle-aged board that actually women deserve to be at this table also, because it's not beyond the realms of your imagination to suggest that, the women that you talk to on a daily basis are potentially good enough to be here. It's a much harder sell when it comes to race, because some people genuinely don't have friends of another race and genuinely haven't had many interactions with somebody of another race. So the most that they see of the other race is what the media tells them about that race. Right. And that's why campaigns like 56 Black Men are so important, to actually show, look, there are intellectual black men out there. There are men out there that aren't shooting and stabbing and killing each other. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that's, so you're saying it's easier to talk about gender than it is about race, but we do need to have that conversation about race. So how can we do it in such a way that we have allies on our side rather than it being almost an accusatory conversation?
So I think for me, it's about, a lot of what we do as an organization is about data. So what does the data show you in terms of absence, in terms of representation? A lot of the companies that we work with operate within very cosmopolitan areas. So just looking at the demographics of a city like London or like Birmingham or anywhere in the West Midlands, the demographic data within that area will tell you what the composition of that area is. Mm-hmm. Therefore, if your boardroom doesn't reflect that, a conversation needs to be had as to why it doesn't reflect that. and often it's not a case of there being no suitably qualified candidates. It's not a case of there being no, nothing by way of academically qualified individuals. So then the conversation needs to be shifted more towards actually what is it that you're doing that is stopping these people either getting into the organization in the first place or progressing through the organization to the point where they're represented within leadership. Right. And that I guess that's a difficult conversation to have, because it then can come across accusatory, but it's all in the way that it's taken. It's all in the way that it's presented as well. So data doesn't necessarily lie. And conversations need to be had. So one of the things that we've implemented into our platform is an assessment, or the ability to assess recruitment partners. So recruitment agencies that you use, how diverse is their candidate pool? How diverse are the candidates that they're putting forward to you? Mm-hmm. A lot of the time, I've dealt with recruitment agents in the past, and they have kind of call sheets of 100 names, and they'll go from 1 to 100. And if they fill up their quota by the time they get to 20, then, 21 to 100 don't get a look in. And that's not necessarily the most efficient way of doing things. That's not necessarily the giving you as a company the best candidates.
Right.
So it's about flipping the tables and actually holding a mirror up to some extent to say, if you're a recruitment agent operating within the Midlands, why is it that your candidate pool doesn't look like the Midlands? But the onus is on the companies. Companies have to want that diversity. Companies have to want to be willing to embrace the idea that there are other people that could add to the conversations that you have at a leadership level.
Right. You know what, Mac, we could sit here and talk for hours about this, and unfortunately and sadly, we cannot untangle everything in one conversation or even two conversations. And we're talking about this from the point of view that these are what the companies are meant to be doing. Now, you did an interview last year for Lead Magazine, and you talk about those sat at the table needing to reach beyond their usual networks. But you also made a very important point about the onus on us to be suitably prepared for that seat. In your estimation, what steps, and when I say we, I'm talking about us, do we need to take to prepare ourselves to be ready?
Yeah. So a lot of it is to do with skilling yourself, equipping yourself. So understanding what you need to know, how you need to be able to function, whether that's the way they communicate things, whether that's the thought processes that you go through, even if it's just attracting a mentor. So if your aspiration is to sit on the board of a bank, there's people currently sitting on boards of banks, and it's about reaching out to them to say, okay, you're in this position, how did you get there? Is there anything that you can share with me that may make my path that little bit easier?
Right.
It's also about, I guess, learning that you have unique assets to bring to these places. So one of the things I was talking to a vice principal of a school about was, equipping young people to say, actually, when you go into these spaces, it's not about assimilating, and it's not about becoming a poor imitation of who's already there.
Right.
It's about understanding that actually you have a different perspective to somebody else, and that's all right. You've got a different life experience to somebody else, and that also is all right. Not only is it all right, it's probably more beneficial to that conversation, so you can see things the way that somebody else can't see things, and that's an asset. I think for so long the narrative has been that you have to assimilate, and you have to kind of adopt these cultures and these mannerisms and these ways of speaking without saying anything. But actually there's a certain amount of challenge And that's where innovation comes from. If you look at the root of what innovation is, it's about doing something different, or taking something that's currently being done and making it better, making it more efficient, making it more profitable or more productive. And that comes from thinking differently. So it's about retaining the essence of, what makes you you, because we as individuals will have something to add to this world.
And that's important. And I think it's something that we need to start remembering, that we have value intrinsically. And so when we walk into a room, we come with that value, we come with that knowledge.
Yeah, definitely. Most definitely.
And so in the very beginning, you spoke about how, with the Old Boys Network, people are trained who have gone to Eton to believe that they're being prepared for leadership. And so they walk with this, almost impervious kind of, I'm here to lead. So there's never a shadow of doubt. How do you deal with doubt? How have you dealt with doubt in your life and career?
Good question. I think for the most part, early on in my career, I didn't deal with it very well. So I assimilated a lot. I laughed at a lot of rubbish jokes very early on. But I guess the older I've got, the more I've began to value myself. The more I've begun to understand that, I do have value. I do have something to give. In terms of doubt is natural when you're not used to doing things. So the first time you swim, you might doubt whether you can do a width or a length. The more you do it, the less you'll doubt. So right. Doubt is natural. But it's about, I think there's that old adage that says, feel the fear and do it anyway. Something like that. Yes. I might have completely mangled that, but it comes down to that. You can't. I was going to say something really cliche. I'm going to say it anyway. You can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. So it's pushing past that mental boundary, that barrier that you think is holding you back, and continuing to push that limit, because there's nothing to be gained within your comfort zone. So make yourself a little bit uncomfortable, and then the more you get used to making yourself a little bit uncomfortable, the more comfortable you'll be in all situations. And I think for me personally, that's what I strive to be. I strive to be comfortable in every situation, which means that I have to make myself uncomfortable in situations that I'm not used to until they become comfortable.
Okay. So, Mac, what do you want your legacy to be for you and the Equal Group?
Oh my God, that's a really big question. For me, I guess both. I would say for both me, myself and the Equal Group, we want to change the world. I think there's so much more that we as people could do on this earth, but we get in our own way. So. For me personally, it's about helping people get out of their own way. As a company, it's about giving other companies and other people the tools that they need to get out of their own way. So in the equality, diversity and inclusion space, there's companies out there that could be, creating the next big thing, but their limited scope of how to recruit and how to promote and how to progress and how to pay is stopping them. So by us helping them unpick that, it gets them to that situation a lot quicker.
That's a good legacy.
Thank you. I hope we can live up to it.
That's a good legacy to actually lay down.
How about you?
Oh, wait, now, no, Mac. I'm interviewing you. No.
I thought we built up a rapport.
Wow. Okay, that threw me. What do I want my legacy to be?
Yeah.
I want to be that person that gave people the room to tell their own stories. I want to have a platform that shares and champions the stories of diverse voices for women, men, and especially our men, and a platform to share their humanity. Because I have a brother, a father, I have nephews, I have male friends, and I watch my young nephews, and I don't want them to grow up in a world where they're somehow denied their right to humanity because you need to man up and be a strong black man.
That's powerful. Really powerful.
Thank you. So, yeah, that threw me. Okay, so we have come to that point. Let's talk about your so loud moment for the week. What is your so loud moment, Mac?
My so loud moment. So I think for me, it's the development of this platform. You know, I really feel like this platform has the potential to change the way that people see diversity and inclusion and actually act upon it. So, as I said, the platform is linked to the application process, but it allows companies to have the tools that they need in order to attain and attract more diversity within their organization. So I'm really excited about what we're doing. We've had great feedback from the market so far, and for the next couple of months it's just about pushing that.
Mac, that deserves a huge round of applause, and we do have applause sound, so here you go first.
Nice.
And secondly, we need more tools that are out there that's going to change the way people are recruited, because there's so many talented individuals who, like you said, are being shut out because of a bias or another.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for me as well, that whole bias thing extends beyond skin color and gender and sexuality. It's little things like when people put out job ads, they say must have 5 years experience. Why is that? Does that mean that somebody that's been doing it for 5 years is automatically better than somebody that, you know, taught themselves in their bedroom? Yeah, so I think these are things that we need to challenge ourselves with.
You know, you've posed a lot of questions, and I really that thing about the experience is almost a catch-22. Well, how can I get experience if you won't hire me? But you need to be hired to get an experience. So what do we do? So I'm looking forward to seeing how this platform changes recruitment globally.
Me too.
So let's talk about books. What are you currently reading, or what was the last book you read?
Oh, good question. So I'm an avid reader without the time to be an avid reader. So I love to read, but I only get the chance to read when I go away. So I'm currently halfway through Renee Edo Lodge's Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race.
Right.
Yeah. And I've got a kind of a reading list about 10 or 15 books long of what's next on my reading list.
Wow. Okay. I haven't had the opportunity to read Renee's book. Would you recommend it?
I would. I'll lend it to you after I'm finished with it.
Okay. All right. I will hold you to that. So how can people connect with you and the Equal Group?
Good question. So me, I am usually Mac Alonge, at Mac Alonge on Twitter, at _Mac Alonge on Instagram, Mac Alonge on Facebook. That's MACALONGE. And then the company, The Equal Group, is at The Equal Group everywhere. Website is www.theequalgroup.com.
Okay.
And Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, etc. is at The Equal Group.
Okay. So that's how you can connect, reach out to Mac, have a conversation about diversity, inclusion, and actually have a conversation about how you can lend your voice to making those changes. Now, Mac, I have just a couple more questions. In fact, there's a question I've been meaning to ask, and it's around this idea that inclusion and diversity, there's a misconception people have that it's a drive for, as they use in the States, an affirmative action program. How do we break that misconception?
So I would say it's not an inaccurate, this sounds really weird the way I phrase this, but it's not an inaccurate misconception. Okay. So for me as a black person, I never want to be in a position where I have a good job and in the back of my mind I'm thinking, did I just get this job because I'm black and because that's a tick in the box? And that goes for women and people with different sexualities and genders, etc., etc. So what it really comes down to, in order to allay that fear or to allay that misconception, is that actually we need a better way of doing things. We need a better way of assessing how we recruit, because then you can say that there was a methodology or an algorithm behind why somebody was recruited or why somebody was promoted or why somebody is paid the amount that they're paid. Right. So even now, if we look at kind of the way that the media storm is around the gender pay gap,
yes,
it's because there's a lack of transparency in terms of who gets paid what and why. So until you remove that cloud of ambiguity as to why people have paid certain things and why people are hired into certain positions and why people are promoted faster than others, we'll always have those questions. And any policy or initiative that we come up with that isn't greater levels of transparency or greater levels of robustness in terms of proving and demonstrating how and why we've made decisions will just look like a tokenry or arbitrary gesture.
Right. So here's my
Did that answer your question?
It did.
I felt like I said a lot.
No, it did. It did answer the question, and it actually makes you think about how inclusion, how diversity is actually being played out in the workplace. And like I said, this is a longer conversation to be had. So my last question for you: what is your deepest fear around the diversity conversation?
What's my deepest fear around the diversity conversation? You know what, the way that you frame the question makes me want to give you the answer, I have no fears, because why should anybody fear a conversation?
Okay, true.
But if you were to change the question as to what is my biggest fear around the diversity and inclusion agenda rather than the conversation, my biggest fear with regards to that would be that, you know, companies just do a load of arbitrary things without actually getting to the root cause of the issue. So, for example, a company paying men and women the same and hiring a load of ethnic minorities just so that the stats mask the wider issues, but then when you go into that workplace, people are treated like crap on a day-to-day basis. That's my biggest thing, because that's not actually tackling the issue, that's just masking over it.
Putting a bandage over it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Mac, I have to say thank you so much for being on the show tonight.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thank you for the questions as well.
You're so welcome. Guys, it's a wrap. We cannot solve the problem around diversity, inclusion, and eliminating biases in the corporate world, but the onus is on us to actually start speaking up, start preparing ourselves, making sure that we are putting ourselves in the position to stand up and speak on our behalves, and to be prepared. Now, if you want to find out more about the Equal Group, you can reach out to Mac Alonge and make sure you conversate with him. If you have an idea how to start an affinity group at your corporate environment so that you can start tackling that issue, this is something that the Equal Group can actually give you pointers around. So you want to reach out to Mac. It's twitter.com, the Equal Group, and that's the same for Insta, and he's on LinkedIn. So Mac, I'm going to say once again, thank you for being on the show tonight.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
You've been listening to
take
the
care.
Shine Out Loud show. If you want to connect with us or let us know what you thought of today's show, be sure to follow us on Twitter at Shine Out Show.